guys, today I want to show you how to make a cheese souffle. This one is really delicious. I personally love souffles a lot, but obviously usually I'm making sweet ones. So I'm going to show you today how to make a savory one. It's so fun. So I've got little ramekins here. These guys are already prepared, but I just want to show you how to do one. I've got some melted butter, and I'm going to brush the bottom of my pan first. And then I'm going to make sure I brush on the sides. I want to brush upwards. And this is basically telling the souffle where I want it to go. I want it to rise up. So I'm going to brush upwards. And for a sweet souffle, I would coat this in sugar, but today, because we're doing cheese, I'm going to coat it in some grated Parmesan. Just going to sprinkle a little in here, and then I'm just going to turn slowly and coat every little side of that. And that's going to make a beautiful little crust on the side of our souffle. So this guy is ready to go, and now I'm going to get started making the components of the souffle. Souffle consists of two main components, and that's going to be your egg whites or your meringue and your base, which is going to usually contain yolk and some other flavorings, whatever you're putting in it. Today, since we're doing a cheese souffle, I'm going to do some milk in a saucepan. We're going to warm this up, and then I'm going to melt some butter, and we're going to basically make a very light roux with some flour and spices, and then thicken up the milk, and then add our egg yolks to that. And we're not going to put the cheese in until after we've whipped our egg whites. So essentially you're taking a very light and fluffy thing and the more heavy thing, and we're going to combine them very slowly and fold them in together. So at the very end, we're going to get a really delicious, beautiful, nice rising souffle, and I'm going to show you how to do that perfect every time. Okay guys, so I've got some milk warming on this back burner over here. I've got it on very low heat because I really just want it to be warm and not quite room temp anymore. And then I've got my butter melting in this saucepan. So I'm going to make sure it's completely melted before I start. In this little bowl right here, I've got some all-purpose flour, some cayenne, and a little bit of salt. You could also do black pepper. A very traditional one is Gruyere cheese, paprika, and nutmeg. It's a very traditional French cheese souffle. Today I wanted to be a little different, a little more exciting, and I'm going to do some cheddar and cayenne because I think those flavors are going to go really nicely together. So essentially, once this butter is nice and all melted, we're going to whisk constantly after we add that flour. We don't want lumps and we don't want anything to burn. We're really not going for any kind of dark color. We're just trying to get that starchy, floury taste to get out. Anywhere from about 1 to 3 minutes, we're going to cook it. Once that's done, I'm going to add my milk to that, put it back on the stove, and just thicken up that milk a little bit, again, for about 1 to 3 minutes. All right, my butter's melted, so I'm going to add my flour and spices. We're just going for a little less starchier taste of that flour. I'm going to whisk constantly. You're going to prevent burning or darkening of that flour too much. You can see that cayenne in there is giving that flour a really nice color. All right, this has been cooking for a little bit and is smelling like that starch is cooked out of it. So I'm going to take my milk that's nice and warm over here, and I'm going to add it slowly into this warm roux. And we're going to whisk until we see no more lumps. I'm going to continue to whisk constantly. You can already see this start to thicken up really quickly. This is a really nice range, really nice even cooking, so this is going really fast for me. All right, that's looking perfect. I'm going to take this now off the stove and transfer it to another bowl so it can cool down to room temp. All right, guys, I'm transferring this to another bowl so it cools down to room temp a little faster. We are going to be adding egg yolks to this base, and I really don't want them to start to cook. So that's why I'm keeping it out of the pan. All right, we're going to let this sit until it cools down a little bit to the touch, and then we're going to add our egg yolks to that base, and we can start whipping our meringue. All right, guys, our base has had time to sit and get about to room temperature. It's nice and cool. And I'm going to take this time to whisk in my yolks into my base. This is a really typical type of base for souffle that's going to contain egg yolks. Not every single souffle does, but for the most part, most of them do. And so we essentially have the fatty, flavorful portion of our souffle, and then we've also got the egg white portion of our souffle that we'll work on next. For a sweet souffle, you're going to have a meringue with sugar involved in the egg whites, but because we are not trying to be sweet today, we're trying to have a nice savory souffle, we're just gonna whip the egg whites totally by themselves. I just wanna make sure that this base is nice and emulsified and there are no lumps of any flour in there. That is looking really nice. All right, nice and shiny and beautiful. All right, now I'm gonna start whipping my egg whites. A pro tip before you ever start whipping any egg whites on a mixer, give it a little wipe down with a paper towel and some vinegar, and that's gonna cut through any fat that could be on there. Egg whites will not whip up if there's any fat. This is gonna go pretty quickly. So first your egg whites are gonna get kind of frothy, and then they're gonna actually start to look a lot whiter in color. And we're looking for what we call a medium peak. And I'm going to show you how you're going to test for a peak. The difference between under whipping them and over whipping them is literally a matter of seconds. So just be really careful. So right now they're starting to froth up. And pretty quickly we're going to start to test. When you test for the peak of a meringue or any egg whites frothing, you're going to take your whip, which is your whisk part of your mixer, and you're going to dip it down and we're going to hold it up and see how stiff that peak actually holds by itself. So as an example, right now it's just kind of gooping right off of my whisk, so it's not going to hold a peak. But in just a matter of a few seconds, you're going to start to see a peak actually form. So, we would call that a soft peak because it's not standing up. So just a little bit longer. It's about 6 seconds, literally. There you go. That's what we're looking for. That peak is holding its shape. Because we're going to be continuing to fold these in, I don't want to over mix these egg whites. They'll get really kind of funky too fast if we do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a small portion of my whites and mix them into my base to lighten it up in texture. Otherwise, we really can't mix them together and fold them well. So just about that much. And I'm going to be half stirring, half folding this in, just to lighten up that texture of that base, make everything easier. All right, see how that texture of that base is much lighter and smoother than it was before? So I'm gonna fold these whites in 2 additions, and as I do that, I'm gonna sprinkle in my cheese. We wanna be careful, we don't wanna deflate anything. There's some of these guys. So when I fold, I'm coming up underneath my product instead of just stirring, and I'm cutting through the middle and coming up underneath. So as we continue to work these egg whites, they will actually continue to whip, essentially, with this process, hence why we don't want to go too far. Before this one is completely immersed, I'm going to actually add the rest of my egg white as well. And then just continue to sprinkle in that cheese as we go. To get ready to bake these guys, I've got my oven at 400 degrees, and I moved my rack to the lower third of the oven. We want to give this guy plenty of room to rise. Be careful as you're doing this. You don't want to overdo it and deflate all of that work you did for those egg whites. All right, this is just about perfect, guys. You can see how much of a different texture that is, right? So I'm gonna show you one of these guys, and then I'm gonna cut and go ahead and we'll finish the rest of these. But I'm only gonna fill this up about that far. I want plenty of room for this guy to continue to rise. All right, now these guys are ready to go in the oven. We're gonna put them in at 400 and then immediately lower the oven temperature to 375. Once they're in there, I'm gonna check them at about 5 minutes. You can make this same recipe with just one large souffle dish. I wanted to do some individual ones because I just think they're adorable, and that way we can each eat one when we want to. So I'm gonna get these in the oven, check them in 5 minutes. I'm gonna show you what they look like as they rise.